Hello friends, I welcome you to the concluding installment of this collection of sleep stories entitled The Sandman's Hour. We will return next week with a different sleep story reading. If you enjoy these readings, I would encourage you to subscribe and press the like button, for this will ensure the continuation of these narrations. If you would like to support this channel further, I would also encourage you to join the channel by clicking the join button or explore the options on Patreon. I thank all of you for your support. And now, let us get ready to listen to these stories, finding a place where we can relax. Ease yourself into that place and take a deep breath. You can feel your body unwind. Your day is done. There's nothing left to do but listen to these stories. And let us begin the final stories of the Sandman's Hour. The Star and the Lily. Once there bloomed in a garden a beautiful white lily on a long stalk so tall that she towered over all the flowers that bloomed near her. Of course, the sunflowers at the back of the garden were much taller, and the hollyhocks that grew in front of the sunflowers were taller too, and also the sweet peas. But they were not near the beautiful lily. Beside her bloomed pansies and poppies, and many other beautiful flowers, but they were not so tall as the lily. A rosebush growing near the lily noticed that she drooped and did not look as happy as usual one morning, and she asked what had happened. "Oh, I'm thinking of someone I love," answered the lily with a sigh. "That should not bring a sigh or make you look sad, my fair friend," said the rose. "Love should make you happier than anything else in the world." "Yes, I suppose it should," answered the lily. "But my love is so far away, I am not sure that I am loved in return." "Oh, immodest lily," said the rose. "I thought you the most modest of all of us, and here you are in love with someone you do not know. Tell me about it, do," said the rose, alert with interest. "I will tell you, dear rose," said the lily, "and perhaps you can tell me how to win the love of my beloved, or how I can overcome my great love for him." "I will do anything I can for you, my dear," said the rose, "but do tell me quick all about your love story." "One night," began the lily, "when everything was quiet in the garden, and all the other flowers were fast asleep, I happened to raise my head and open my petals. The moonlight was streaming over the garden, and I looked around at all the sleeping flowers and wondered how I happened to awake at that hour, when, looking up to see the moon in all her splendor, I beheld a beautiful star looking down at me. At first I thought it was looking at the whole garden, but then I knew all the others were asleep, and I must be the one it was smiling at, for it twinkled and brightened as I gazed at it. I lowered my head and slyly looked again, and still the star was looking, and every time it saw me raise my head, it would twinkle a smile at me. The next night I wanted to make sure it was I that the star really smiled at, and when it was bedtime I only bowed my head and did not sleep. Then, when the garden was still, and I was sure you all slept, I again raised my head and saw my star smiling straight down at me. This time I was sure I was the only one that the star could be smiling at, and I raised my head and opened my petals and let all the perfume of my heart go up to him. And I did not feel that I was bold, for we were all alone, and he smiled down upon me his love for 2 nights. But now I am sorrowful, for it is day, and I cannot see my beloved. He seems only to show his love for me at night. What shall I do, dear Rose? I am not strong enough to stay awake all day and all night too. Soon I will die if I do, and yet I cannot live if I do not see my star each night. That is why I sigh and look so sad. For I might sleep all night some day, and my star will think I do not love him. The rose shook her head. I cannot advise you, my friend, she said. You are in love with someone far above you, and are not even sure if you are loved in return. Be wise and sleep through the night, as the rest of us do, and give up this uncertain lover. But the lily only drooped her head and sighed, and that night looked for her lover again. But the sky was dark, and no bright smile greeted the poor lily. All night she gazed into the dark sky, and when the first light of day came, she was still looking for her lover. The rose looked at her when the sun came upon them that morning, but the lily did not raise her head. She was too full of sorrow to lift her face to the sun, and by the rose saw that she was drooping lower and lower. So she spoke to her. Lily, she said, leaning closer to her, raise your head and let the sun cheer you. You will die if you do not open your petals and get the light and air. But the poor lily was past caring for sun or air. Her petals were limp and her stalk withered. The rose leaned closer to her as she faintly answered, and this is what she heard. Goodbye, my friend, I shall bloom no more. My bright star hid his face from me last night, and I have no desire to live longer. Perhaps I may see him after I am gone from here, and if that is true, I shall be happy. But I cannot live here and not see his face. The wind blew through the garden just then, and took the lily from her stem, scattering her petals far out of the garden. Poor lily, murmured the rose. She went the way we all will go, but her heart was broken, and she died before her time. If she had only looked for love here in the garden, instead of looking so far above her, she might be blooming now. Poor lily. Lazy Gray. All the other squirrels called him Lazy Gray, which was really not a very nice name for a squirrel to have. But it fitted this squirrel, and I am going to tell you how he came to be called by such an unpleasant name. When Lazy Gray was born, there were 3 little squirrels in his family. But he was the youngest, and his mother thought he was the prettiest. and all the rest of the family used to wait on him a great deal. And his mother did not ask him to do errands or to climb trees or any other of the hard tasks that most squirrels have to do. And Lazy Gray took advantage of the kindness of his mother and his brothers and sister, and used to ask them to wait on him. When he was thirsty and wanted a drink of water, he would call to his mother and say, "I am thirsty," and she would take a nutshell and go down to the brook and fill it with nice cool water and bring it to him for him to drink. And sometimes he wouldn't even say thank you when he had finished. And he used to make his brothers go on long journeys through the woods to get a particular kind of nut of which he was very fond. And if they happened to bring him one that was not good, he would find fault with them and tell them that they did not know good nuts from bad ones. All through the summer he fooled away his time, sleeping and lying in the sun, and never a single nut did he gather for himself. But when fall came, and his two brothers were taken ill, his mother said that he would have to help her gather nuts, because she could not gather enough to last the whole family through all the long winter. Lazy thought it was very hard that he should be called upon to work for his brothers, even if they were sick, and he complained very bitterly about how hard it was for him to climb trees all day and store nuts. Whenever he could, he stole away and lay down behind a rock and kept hidden until his mother came and found him. And then she would tell how, when it got cold and there was snow all over the ground, and he was hungry, he would wish that he had been a good squirrel and had gathered the nuts while he could. But he did not believe her and said, "Oh, I have gathered all the nuts I shall want, and I'm not going to work any more." And then he would go to sleep again. Weeks passed by, and it grew colder and colder, and the snow came. And all the squirrels began to draw on their stores of nuts. Lazy found that he got pretty hungry sometimes, and that the habit of eating and drinking all he wanted in the summer made him want to eat and drink all he wanted in the winter. And as he had never taught himself self-denial, he ate all he wanted, and very early in the winter he began to see that the nuts he had gathered would not last him halfway through the winter. And almost before he knew it, his whole store was exhausted, and he had nothing to eat. Then he asked his mother to let him have some of the nuts that she had gathered. And being a kind mother, she let him have just as many as she could. But she still had to keep some for his sick brothers. When she would not give him all he thought he ought to have, he decided that he would go over to a neighboring tree and ask a squirrel over there for some of his nuts. And for weeks he went from one tree to another, begging nuts, until every squirrel in the woods hated to see him coming. For they knew he was going to beg food that he should have gathered for himself. At last he became so much of a nuisance that all the squirrels in the wood held a meeting and decided that each one of them would give 2 nuts to Lazy, as they now all called him, and that he would have to live for the rest of the winter on the store they contributed or else starve. When Lazy saw what a small store of nuts he would have to live upon until spring, he was frightened, for he had eaten almost as many nuts as there were there in a week. but he knew he had to make them last, so he ate very sparingly, and his sides began to be less plump, and his cheeks less full. And by springtime he was a pretty sorry-looking squirrel, with his ribs showing plainly through his sides, and his bushy tail looking bigger than the whole of the rest of him. But it taught him a good lesson, and early in the next summer, just as soon as there were any nuts to be had, he began to store them away, and when winter came again, he had a big hole in the tree filled full, and his mother was much pleased. "You see," she told him, "how wicked it is not to provide for the future and store up things that are necessary against the time when you will need them." And Lazy agreed with her, and told her that never again, so long as he lived, would he merit the name of Lazy. The Old Grey Hen. "Oh dear," said the Old Grey Hen, "what a life this is! Up in the morning at the break of day, in answer to the summons of that crowing rooster. Scratch all the forenoon for worms. Sit on a nest and leave a beautiful egg there, and in half an hour along comes somebody and takes the egg, and I never see it again. Then every spring I am put on a lot of eggs that I never saw before, and am supposed to sit there until a brood of chickens are hatched out, and then for weeks I have to scratch for them as well as for myself. I don't see anything in this sort of life, and I propose to change it until it is more to my liking, and more as the life of such fine hen as I am ought to be." Old Daddy Gander happened along just as the Grey Hen finished talking to herself. "What's the trouble this morning?" he asked. "Why all this sputtering and sputtering? One would think that the whole barnyard had turned upside down, and the corn had all fallen off into the sky." "There's matter enough," said the Grey Hen. "What have we fowl to live for? I scratch, and you waddle, and I scratch. And what does it all amount to? Something has got to be done, and if no one else will do it, why, I shall. Things are going to be different with me. I guess I keep on as I am," said old Daddy Gander as he waddled away. "I might make them worse as they are, and they are not so bad anyway." "Good morning, Grey Hen," said Madam Duck. "What a fine day we are going to have. The water will be nice and warm for my ducklings, and I can give them a good swim in the pond." "It is neither a good morning, nor is it going to be a fine day. And as for swimming in the pond, if I had to mother a lot of children with as homely feet as your brood has, I would want to keep them in the water all the time, so that no one would see them." "What mean disposition Grey Hen has," said Madam Duck to the turkey gobbler, as she went on her way to the pond. "I tried to be agreeable to her, and she insulted me and spoke so unkindly of my children that I felt quite like crying." "I almost wish that she had been a little more unkind," said the gobbler, "for I have never seen a duck crying, and I imagine it might be an almost sight. Perhaps Grey Hen needs some of my good advice, and I will walk over shortly and see her." But the old gobbler was saved his trouble, for in a few minutes he saw Grey Hen coming down the path toward him. As she came up to him, he said, "What a miserable feeling morning this, Mrs. Hen. My feathers will none of them lie straight, and every worm that I have tasted for breakfast has been bitter." "You are quite right," said Gray Hen. "It is just like all the mornings recently, uncomfortable and disagreeable, and there does not seem to be any promise of anything better." "You are quite right," said the gobbler. "What the gander and the duck see in the present to be so satisfied with, I don't understand. And as to the future, I don't know why we should expect any more of that than the present." "I have always felt," said Gray Hen, "that you, Mr. Gobbler, never got half your deserts in this barnyard. Everybody seems to think that the rooster, because he crows every morning at sunup, is the wisest bird in the yard. But as for me, I have always held you in greater esteem, and have often spoken of the nobility of your looks and the regal way in which you walk about the place. If I had any voice in the matter, I should suggest that you be recognized as superior to the rooster. But you see, the hens have nothing to say, although some day I feel sure that it will be different." "You are very kind," said the gobbler, "and I feel as you do, while I have no wish to be ruler of the yard, that the hens should have more to say. You should at least have independence and do as you like." "Oh, I have determined on that already," said Gray Hen, and she told him how she had decided to lay no more eggs, and to scratch as little as she had to. "Well," said the gobbler, "I must be off and see that none of those turkey hens get so far into the woods that they cannot find their way back again. I certainly gave the kind of advice she wanted," he said, when he had got out of her hearing, and that was easier than getting into an argument. And besides that, discontented people and animals are always so much more comfortable if they think others are just as unhappy as they are. Old Gray Hen, however, was as good as her word. She stopped laying eggs, and the amount of gravel that she scratched was scarcely worth mentioning. She stole worms from the younger chickens, who were too polite to punish a hen so old as she was, and altogether she became a general nuisance to all the rest of the barnyard flock. They could not protect themselves, but Farmer Johnson, walking through the yard one day, noticed that Old Gray Hen's toes had grown to almost unusual length. "I guess she doesn't do much scratching," he said as he passed along, "and I suspect she doesn't lay many eggs. I must ask Mother about it when I get back to the house." "No," said Mother Johnson when he asked her. "I haven't found an egg in Gray Hen's nest for a month or more." "She won't pay to winter then," said Farmer Johnson. "We had better eat her." And the following Sunday, when Farmer Johnson sat down for dinner, they brought a big platter of steaming fricassee to the table, and that was the end of Old Gray Hen. A day or two after, when the gobbler happened to meet Madam Duck, she said, "I hear that Gray Hen has left us." "Yes," said the gobbler, "and I hope she is happier than she was here. But her contentment was greatest when others were distressed." The Worsted Doll. Good Mother Munster and her husband Jacob had 5 daughters. Of course they loved them dearly, but they often wished for a son. "Then he could help me in the shop," said Jacob, who was a maker of dolls. Not that I would exchange one of our girls for a boy," he added, "but I wish we had a son as well as 5 girls." Whether the stork heard this talk between Jacob and his wife and took offense because they questioned his judgment, or whether he thought Jacob and his wife had a number of children, I do not know. But he never called again at the door, and their daughters grew up to womanhood without a brother. One day, Jacob hurried in from his shop, which was back of his house. He was very much excited and talked so fast that good Mother Monster could not understand half he said. "They want worsted dolls," he explained at last. 2 dozen worsted dolls to be sent across the water in time for Christmas. Jacob raised his hands with the gesture of despair, for at his shop they did not make worsted dolls, and he could not understand why anyone should want them. "There is plenty of time to make them," Mother Monster said. "The girls and I can knit them, and we will make half of them girls and half of them boy dolls." And so the knitted dolls were begun by good Mother Monster and her daughters. One day, when Mother Monster was knitting on the last doll, which was a boy, she began to think how much she would miss them when they were finished and sent across the sea. "I will make you extra large," she said as she added a few stitches to the length and breadth of the doll. "And if I could, I would knit you a tongue, and so you could talk, and legs you could run on, and have you like a live boy." Mother Monster knitted as she thought, and though she did not know it, she knitted all her wishes into the boy doll's body, so that when he was finished, he could do all the things she had wished. But he was a wise little fellow, and did not betray himself for fear he would not be shipped across the water with the other dolls. And he wanted to see the world. It was a long journey to the other side of the ocean, and the boy doll thought it never would end. But by and by he was taken from the big packaging case, and with other dolls placed in a window of a big shop. "I wish someone would speak to me," thought the boy doll, but not a word did the other dolls utter, and as he did not wish to appear forward, he kept silent also. One day a lady came into the store and carried the boy doll away with her. And then one night he was put on a tree trimmed with glitter ropes of tinsel. A little girl came into the room after a while, and when she saw Boy Doll, she exclaimed, "Oh, I hope the Boy Doll is for me." "So do I," thought Boy Doll, "for I am sure you will talk to me." And sure enough, he was given to the little girl. "I am so glad you were for me," she told him, "for I do need a father for my doll family." "Dear me," thought Boy Doll, "what a responsibility to be forced upon me so suddenly." And not a word could he speak in reply to the little girl, because he was so surprised. The little girl took him into a large room, which was the home of her doll family. "This is your husband, Rosamund," she said to a large French doll, "and his name is Theodore. And this is your father," she told a group of small dolls. "He has come to live with you." "I hope you will be a good father to them," she said to Theodore, but Boy Doll was so overcome that his tongue clung to the roof of his mouth, and he was silent. Theodore, as we may call him now, was placed in a large armchair, and the little girl left him with his family. His grand-looking wife held her head very high and cast a look of disdain at poor Theodore, for she was not pleased to have a worsted doll for her husband, and the children, following the example of their mother, looked at their new father and giggled. "Oh, why did I leave my good mother monster?" thought Theodore. "She wanted a son, and she would have loved me." He sat very still for a while. He was thinking what he should do. He knew that as the father of a family he should be respected, and here were his children laughing at him. If it were not for the haughty French wife, he might exert his authority. But Theodore was a little afraid of her. "I'll begin with the children," he said at last, "and that may impress Rosamond." So while the children were giggling and whispering, Theodore suddenly jumped up from his chair. Of course, he was very stiff in his movements, as he did not have any joints, and the children laughed out and said, "Our father hasn't any joints in his legs." The stern look on Theodore's face soon quieted them, however, and by the time he reached them they were quite afraid. Theodore cleared his throat and put his hands behind him. "It is very evident," he said, "that you need a father, for your manners are shockingly bad. What is your name?" he asked, taking one of them by the shoulder. "Etta," she answered. "And yours?" he said, pointing to another. "May," was the reply. "And yours, and yours, and yours, and yours, and yours, and yours?" he asked, receiving in turn the names of Sally, Frida, Maud, Cora, Dora, and Ida. "I shall divide you into 2 groups of 4 each," he said, after hearing their names. "One will be the Etta, May, Sally, Frida group, and the other will be the Maud, Cora, Dora, Ida group. That will simplify matters for me, and I can talk to 4 at one time." "Etta, May, Sally, Frida," he called. "Yes, father," answered all 4 at once. "If I ever hear you giggling again, as you did when I appeared, I shall punish you severely." "Yes, sir," answered the trembling dolls. "Maud, Cora, Dora, Ida," said Theodore in a stern voice. "Yes, father," answered the second group. "If you behave again in the manner you did when I first came to this house, you will be punished in a way you will remember." "Yes, sir," answered the 4 dolls. Theodore turned away, and with all the dignity he could muster, walked toward his wife. Rosamond's head was not held so high now, for her husband's manner with the children had shown her that he intended to be master in his home. "When do we dine?" he asked. "We have no regular hour," she answered. "We will dine at 7, said Theodore. "Breakfast at 8, the hour for lunch you may please yourself about, as I shall not be here. The children will not dine with us," he added. "And now I should like to see my room." Rosamond, who was as completely subdued as the children, very meekly did as she was told, and Theodore found himself master without any further trouble. But he could not forget good Mother Monster, and while he knew he should be content in the bosom of his family, he found his thoughts often with Mother Monster across the water. It was not an easy matter, being the father of a family. If he felt like jumping or lying on the floor, there were the children, and he must not lose his dignity for a moment. "I would rather be a son," he said, "than be father of a family. If I could get back to Germany and good Mother Monster, I should be quite happy." Of course, this was not the proper feeling for a husband and father to have. But you must remember that Theodore had all this thrust upon him before he had any of the joys of boyhood. One day he heard the family where he lived talking about going abroad, and saw the big trunks being packed. "Oh dear," thought Theodore, "I wonder if they will take me with them. Perhaps they will go to Germany, where the good Mother Monster lives." And then Theodore thought a very wicked thought. "I will get into one of the trunks and hide," he said. "And if I can find the German village where Mother Monster lives, I will not come back to be the father of a family, but I will stay with good Mother Monster and be her little boy." Of course, that was deserting his family, but Theodore did not know anything about how wrong that was. And so one day, when he was left alone in the room with the trunks, he climbed over the side of one of them and hid himself between the folds of a dress, without saying goodbye to his wife or children. Theodore did not feel safe until the man came for the trunks, and then his heart leaped for joy. After a long time, the trunks were opened in a hotel, and Theodore wondered what they would say when they found him. "Here is Theodore," said the mother to her little girl, when she found him inside her dresses. "I wonder how he got in my trunk." The little girl had not brought any of her dolls, and she was so pleased to see Theodore that she hugged him. Theodore felt guilty when he thought of what he intended to do, but his love for Mother Monster was deeper than that for his family. After many weeks of visiting different places, Theodore had almost given up hope of seeing Mother Monster again, when one day he heard them say, "We will go to Berlin tomorrow." "Berlin? Berlin," repeated Theodore. "Where have I heard that name before?" Then, all at once, it came to him that it was in Germany, and that not far from there was the village where Mother Monster lived. He could hardly keep from jumping for joy. One morning, after they had been in Berlin for a week, the father of the little girl said, "We are visiting a little village today where they make dolls." "I will take Theodore," said the little girl, "for I want to get a girl doll just like him." They rode quite a distance on the train, and then in a carriage, and stopped at a house that made Theodore's heart jump so loudly that he feared they would hear it. For the house was the home of good Mother Monster, and there, standing in the doorway, was the dear old lady herself. They went into the kitchen, and the little girl put Theodore on a chest which stood in the room. In the excitement of seeing the doll shop, she forgot to keep him with her, and as soon as Theodore found himself alone, he slipped off the chest and hid behind it. When the little girl came back from the shop, she had a large doll in her arms, and she quite forgot Theodore. A few days after, when Mother Monster was cleaning her kitchen, she moved the chest, and there was Theodore with his arms stretched up toward her. Mother Monster picked him up. "Why, it is my boy," she said. "However did you get here?" she asked. Then she thought of the little girl. "I hope she does not send for you," she said, and she held Theodore tightly in her arms. "So do I," said Theodore, and although he did not speak out loud, Mother Monster seemed to understand. "You'd rather live here, hadn't you?" she asked. "I will put you on this seat in the corner, and you shall be my little boy. All the girls have gone to homes of their own, and Jacob and I are very lonely." "Look, Jacob," she said, as he came in the door. "Here is the worsted doll I made to send across the water. He has come back to live with us, and so at last we have a son." Jacob smiled. He didn't think much of worsted dolls, but he took Theodore by one hand. "You have traveled a long distance, son," he said, "since you left here, and can tell Mother Monster and me all about what you have seen, as we three sit by the fire in the long winter evenings." And so Theodore found a mother and father and lived a happy and peaceful life, undisturbed by the cares of a family. But sometimes he dreams and awakens himself by calling Etta me Salifreda or Maud Corridora Ida, and when he makes sure it is only a dream, he turns over and goes to sleep again with a smile of contentment on his face, which plainly says, "Theodore, you are a lucky man."